The Northwest Calvary Association invites you to travel back in time with us and celebrate the history of the horse soldier in America. After the War of 1812, the United States had a small standing army and a tiny cavalry, mostly stationed in the West. At West Point and other military academies, cadets were educated in the Napoleonic tactics of Europe. Their heavy armored cavalry were used as shock troops, literally beating down enemy formations with massive charges. Drill was a regular part of the daily routine, training horses to go from file to line and back again to maintain the regulation paces to suffer pressure in the ranks. The sword was their principal weapon, the curved saber of the light cavalry for cutting and slashing, the straight sword of the heavy cavalry for thrusting. Horse and rider needed extensive training to use these weapons effectively. It was an accepted fact that it took 2 years to train a cavalryman and his mount. But after the training ended and the young officers headed west, they found that mass charges were of little use against an enemy that would not stand a fight, but disappeared like smoke or waited in ambush. In the decades before the Civil War, the Army learned hard lessons and tactics from their fast and mobile foes. The 1950s saw the development of the McClellan saddle, which the Army continued to use with minor modifications into the 1940s. Lightweight yet sturdy, the McClellan was designed to fit the backs of horses as they lost weight, and unfortunately, reality when enemies and armies traveled long distances on scant foliage. Weapons, too, were vastly improved. The single-shot pistols and short, smooth-bore musketoons were replaced by revolvers and breech-loading carbines. And the heavy sword was replaced by light cavalry sabers. In 1861, as the Civil War broke out, the regulars were some of these. At the military academies, both students and instructors found themselves torn between loyalty to their states and loyalty to their country. Many of them joined Southern forces still dressed in their cadet gray uniforms. Early on, the North was slow to augment its small force of regulars. Cavalry was expensive to train and equip, and after all, the war would be short. But after the humiliating federal defeat at Manassas, the call went out for volunteers. Many of those volunteers were green as grass. It was said that the North was a nation of drivers, not riders, and 3 out of 4 Yankee troopers had never ridden a horse before they enlisted. They often had only weeks to acquire those skills that West Pointers took 3 years to learn, and Southern riders developed over a lifetime. Now, their horses, too, were often green. Federal troops were supplied by often unscrupulous contractors. The horses were uneven in quality, and many had never been ridden. While most Southerners supplied their own horses, they had been bred for work and sport, not war. Tall, thoroughbred fox hunters, elegant saddle horses, and compact quarter-mile racers were thrown into the mix. Now they had to learn to maintain consistent speed, intervals, and alignment with herd mates that were taller and shorter, faster and slower. Most difficult of all, they had to charge at a mass of horses that was charging at them. Nothing could be more contrary to a horse's nature. As the war dragged on, the strength of the Southern cavalry waned, as that of the North grew. The green Yankee troopers of 1861 were now hardened veterans, and the Federals brought in fresh supplies of horses from the Midwest and Canada. By the war's end, the Union Army had 80,000 horses in the field, while the Confederates had only 40,000. In April of 1865, the Army of Northern Virginia, surrounded and almost out of food and ammunition, surrendered. More than 600,000, 1.5 million horses and wagons had died officers from George Armstrong Custer to Phil Sheridan used lessons learned in the Civil War, the Indian Wars, the expeditions to Mexico, and the Spanish-American War. The tactics of the past gave way to a faster, more flexible approach that's still used today by America's armed forces. Only rarely would lines of horsemen charge across open fields. The modern American cavalry was light cavalry. Skirmishers, scouts, and raiders. But they could also become mounted infantry, dismounting to fight on foot to take full advantage of the range and power of modern weapons. By the beginning of the 20th century, it became all too apparent to military commanders that a new method of cross-country riding would be needed to train vast numbers of unskilled recruits and horses. The old military style of jumping with long stirrups, staying deep in the saddle, was inefficient, even punishing to the horse. The solution came when Italian cavalry officer Federico Caporali introduced the school of forward-seat riding, which quickly spread to America. The inferior quality of horses provided by government contractors was addressed as well. In 1908, Congress authorized the remount service to provide horses to the Army. During World War I, more than 500,000 horses and mules were procured, trained, and issued by the service for supplying troops, hauling supplies, evacuating the wounded, and pulling artillery pieces. Now, World War II saw the mechanization of the Army. Yet even then, and in the Korean conflict that followed, horses and mules continued to be used in rugged, inaccessible terrain where motorized vehicles could not go, from the mountains of northern Italy to the jungles of Burma. Today's riders owe a debt of gratitude to the military horsemen. After World War II, many civilian riders learned the balanced seat from military instructors like Sergeant Paul Rutland, who taught at Oregon State. This seat is still used for fox hunting, polo, and eventing, and the modern quarter horse owes much to the U.S. remount service stallions, which contributed to foundation stock horse bloodlines such as Doc Barr, Jesse James, and Skipper W. While today's Army rides to battle in armored vehicles, tanks, and helicopters, mules and horses are still an important part of military traditions. They can be seen today in ceremonial units like the Old Guard, whose horse-drawn caissons bring fallen heroes to their final resting place at Arlington National Cemetery. And appropriately, horses are now helping heal the hearts, minds, and bodies of our wounded veterans in riding programs around the country. The Northwest Cavalry Association honors the fallen, both human and equine, for making the ultimate sacrifice for their cause and country. A wonderful job, ladies and gentlemen, folks there at the Northwest Calvary Association, giving us a wonderful glimpse back in time as we celebrate both horse and rider.